Throwaway account. I'm 33M, my girlfriend is 31F. Together almost 5 years, living together for 3. No kids, no marriage yet, but we talked about it like it was inevitable. Ring someday. A house after one more promotion. We were building towards something, or at least I thought we were. The first thing that changed wasn't her behavior. It was her tone. She used to ask how my day was and actually listen. Then it turned into quick check-ins while scrolling her phone. If I paused too long before answering, she'd say, "You're overthinking again." That phrase became her favorite. Overthinking. Like noticing distance was a flaw instead of signal. She started saying she needed more independence, more nights alone, more time with friends I barely knew. She framed it as healthy, like I should be proud of her growth. When I said I missed her, she smiled gently and said, "You shouldn't rely on one person for everything." That stung, but I swallowed it. The weird part was how affectionate she became right after pulling away. Random hugs, sweet texts, "I love you" out of nowhere. It felt like maintenance, not connection. Like she was keeping me calm while something else shifted underneath. One night, lying next to her in bed, I asked if we were okay. She didn't look at me, just said, "Of course we are. Why you always look for problems?" I remember staring at the ceiling, thinking maybe she was right. I didn't realize yet that distance doesn't announce itself loudly. Sometimes it just quietly replaces you. After that night, it felt like the relationship came with an updated rule book I hadn't been given. Things that were once normal suddenly weren't. Texting her during the day became clingy. Asking when she'd be home was tracking. Wanted planned weekends together was pressure. Each label landed softly, but together they reshaped how I moved around her. She started spending more time out of the apartment. Gym sessions that ran late. Coffee meetings that turned into full evenings. When she came home, she'd be energized, almost glowing, then immediately exhausted when I tried to talk. If I brought up how little time we were spending together, she'd say, "You're counting again," like noticing absence was a moral failure. The twist was how reasonable she sounded. She'd say things like, "Healthy couples don't need constant reassurance," or, "I'm just learning to set boundaries." I found myself nodding, even as something in my chest tightened. I didn't want to be the guy who held someone back from growth. Meanwhile, my needs quietly disappeared. I stopped bringing things up because every conversation somehow ended with me apologizing for misreading, for assuming, for making her feel smothered. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Calm disappointment was enough. One night, she casually mentioned a guy from work she'd been talking to a lot. She laughed and said, "Don't make it weird." I laughed too, but later, alone in the dark, I realized how carefully that line had been placed, like a boundary drawn exactly where it would hurt to cross. I kept telling myself I was adapting, that relationships evolve, and this was just a new phase. But there was one night that cracked that illusion. She came home late, dropped her bag by the door, and went straight to the shower without saying much. Not unusual anymore, but she brought her phone into the bathroom. She always did now. While she was in there, her laptop chimed on the coffee table. Just once. Then again. I wasn't trying to snoop. I didn't even touch it. The screen lit up on its own, and all I saw was a name and a message preview. I wish the night didn't have to end. My stomach flipped. I stood there frozen. Like if I didn't move, the moment would pass, and I could pretend I hadn't seen it. I told myself there were explanations. Coworkers flirt. Friends exaggerate. Context matters. That's what logic said. My gut said something else entirely. When she came out of the bathroom, towel around her shoulders, humming, I asked how her night was. She smiled easily and said, "Good, relaxing." Nothing in her face suggested a lie. That scared me more than if she'd looked guilty. I asked who she'd been with. She said, "Just people from work." Plural. Safe. Vague. When I nodded, she leaned over and kissed my forehead like I was a child who'd passed a test. That's when it hit me. She wasn't worried about being caught. She was confident I'd talked myself out of what I already knew. And for the first time, I wonder how long I've been doing exactly that. I didn't confront her about the message, not because I was calm, but because I was terrified of being wrong. I needed something solid, something that didn't rely on intuition, because she'd already trained me to doubt that. Over the next week, I noticed how carefully she spoke. Not cautious, aware. Like every sentence had been pre-approved in her head. If I asked how work was, she'd give a summary with no details. If I asked about a specific person, she'd redirect immediately. Why do you care? She'd say lightly, smiling like the question itself was the issue. Then came the small slip. She mentioned grabbing drinks after work with Mark. Just Mark. Later that same night, she said she'd gone out with a few people from the office. I didn't react. I just filed it away. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did and assumed I wouldn't connect it. The real twist came when she accused me of pulling away. Said I'd been quiet lately, less affectionate. Asked if everything was okay with us. The audacity of it almost knocked the air out of me. I realized then how the story worked. As long as I stayed confused, she stayed comfortable. One night, lying in bed, she told me she loved me and that I was safe. The word felt strange, not warm, strategic. As she fell asleep, I stared at the ceiling and understood something that hurt more than any message ever could. She wasn't hiding the truth very well anymore. She was hiding it just well enough. For me, the hardest part wasn't what I found next. It was realizing how much effort I'd put into not finding it sooner. I had become an expert at explaining things away, timing, tone, coincidences, anything to keep the version of us I believed in intact. That changed on a Tuesday afternoon. She texted saying she'd be working late again. Short message. No emojis. No, miss you. I didn't reply right away. An hour later, she sent, "Everything okay?" That question wasn't concern. It was a temperature check. I said yes. That seemed to satisfy her. That night, she fell asleep fast, phone face down on the nightstand. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Her smartwatch lit up when a message came in. I saw the name, Mark, and the preview. I hate sneaking around, but I love this. That was it. No ambiguity. No room for interpretation. I sat there in the dark, heart pounding, feeling oddly calm. The panic I expected never came. Instead, I felt this quiet grief, like something had already ended, and my body was just catching up. The twist? When I confronted her the next morning, she didn't deny it. She sighed and said, "I didn't want you to find out like this. Not I'm sorry. Not I hurt you. Just regret about timing." That's when I knew this was a mistake she'd made. It was a choice she'd been managing. And suddenly, all that distance made perfect sense. When she realized the denial wouldn't work, she shifted instantly. No tears. No panic. Just calm, like we'd moved into a different phase of a conversation she'd already rehearsed. She told me it wasn't serious, that it just happened, that it filled a gap she didn't know how to talk to me about. Each sentence sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they felt hollow. She said she never meant to hurt me, that she'd been feeling disconnected for a long time. When I asked why she never told me, she said, "I tried, but you always take things personally." That stung, because it reframed her secrecy as my failure to receive the truth properly. Then came the twist. She said she hadn't planned to leave me, that what we had was still real, just different now. She asked if we could work through it, but only if I didn't punish her by asking for details or setting ultimatums. Transparency, apparently, was unfair pressure. I realized then that her version of fixing things involved me absorbing the pain quietly while she figured out what she wanted. There was no space in her plan for my anger, my grief, or my questions. Those were inconveniences. As she talked, something inside me cooled, not in a dramatic way, just a steady understanding settling in. This wasn't a moment of confusion for her. It was a system she'd been running, and I just tripped an alarm. When she finished explaining, she looked at me and asked, "Can we just move forward?" I didn't answer right away. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to save us. I was thinking about how much of myself I'd already lost trying. Her question, "Can we just move forward?" hung in the air longer than it should have. Not because it was complicated, but because it was revealing. Move forward meant forget. Absorb. Adjust. It meant returning to a version of the relationship where my role was to stabilize things while she explored whatever felt good to her. I asked a simple follow-up. Are you still talking to him? She hesitated just long enough to matter. Then she said she needed time to untangle her feelings. Not no, not yes, just vague enough to keep options open. That was the twist that finally cut through everything. I wasn't being asked to forgive a mistake. I was being asked to accept a new hierarchy, one where my pain ranked below her comfort in his presence. Over the next few days, I noticed how little she adjusted her life. Same routines, same phone habits, same late nights. The only thing that changed was how careful she was around me. Softer voice, strategic affection, like damage control, not remorse. One evening, she forgot herself and mentioned a place she'd been recently, a bar I'd never heard of. When I asked when, she corrected herself quickly and said she meant they'd talked about it. The slip was small, but it landed hard. I finally understood something brutal. I wasn't being fought for or chosen. I was being kept just in case. And once I saw that, the relationship stopped feeling like something to save and started feeling like something I needed to leave before it erased me completely. After that realization, something inside me went still. The constant knot in my chest loosened, not because things were okay, but because I stopped trying to make them okay. Hurt needs hope to stay alive. Once hope fades, clarity takes its place. I stopped asking questions. Not out of strategy, out of disinterest. I already knew the answers, and hearing them wouldn't change anything. That unsettled her more than anger ever had. She kept checking in, asking if I was mad, if I was okay, if I wanted to talk. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd ignored my concern for months, but now that I was quiet, she couldn't stand it. The twist came when she suggested we take a break. Not a breakup, not space with boundaries. A break, undefined, flexible. I asked what that meant. She said we'd still live together, still be exclusive for now, but she needed freedom to think. Freedom, apparently, with no constraints for her, and plenty of uncertainty for me. That night, I went for a long walk alone. No music, no phone, just the sound of my own footsteps. For the first time in months, I wasn't replaying conversations or preparing defenses. I was listening to myself, and what I heard was simple. I didn't feel chosen. I felt managed. When I got back, she was asleep. I stood there for a moment, looking at someone I loved deeply and realizing love wasn't enough if it required me to disappear. That's when I knew the next step wasn't confrontation. It was departure. I didn't announce anything. No dramatic confrontation. No packed bags by the door. I just started doing small, quiet things. I moved my important documents into a folder. I transferred my paycheck to a new account. I told a close friend what was happening out loud for the first time, saying it made it real in a way my thoughts never had. She noticed the change immediately, asked why I seemed distant, said she felt like she was losing me. The irony almost hurt. I told her I needed some time to think. She nodded like she understood, then asked if I was still committed to us. I didn't answer right away. That pause said more than any speech could have. The twist came when she tried to reset things. She cooked my favorite meal, suggested a movie night, curling up next to me like nothing had happened. For a moment, it was tempting, familiar, comfortable, but it also felt like watching a rerun, something I'd already seen, already lived through. Later that night, she asked if I was planning to leave her, not angrily, almost casually. I said I didn't know yet. That wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The truth was that I'd already crossed an invisible line inside myself. I wasn't trying to save the relationship anymore. I was preparing to save myself. And once that shift happened, everything else felt like a formality waiting to catch up. The conversation happened on a Sunday morning, quietly, like everything else had been lately. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just coffee going cold between us while the truth finally stopped circling and landed. She asked again if I was planning to leave. This time, I didn't dodge it. I told her I didn't feel safe in the relationship anymore. Not physically, emotionally. I said I felt like an option, not a choice. Like I was constantly adjusting myself to make room for something she refused to let go of. She frowned and said I was being dramatic. That word again. Then she said something that became the twist I didn't expect. I thought you were stronger than this. It wasn't anger that hit me. It was clarity, because in her mind, strength meant endurance. It meant staying quiet, absorbing pain without disrupting her comfort. She genuinely believed that if I loved her enough, I'd accept the situation as it was and call it growth. I told her I wasn't asking her to choose me anymore. I was choosing myself. She went silent, not thoughtful silence, calculating silence. Then she said she needed time to process and went into the bedroom, phone in hand. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. For the first time since this started, I didn't feel like I was losing something. I felt like I was finally standing on solid ground. And I knew the next step wouldn't be emotional. It would be final. I expected chaos after that conversation. Accusations, tears, maybe anger. Instead, the apartment felt hollow, like all the air had been let out without a sound. She barely spoke to me for the next 2 days, moving around me carefully, like we were strangers sharing a space by accident. The twist was how quickly she reframed things. She told friends we were taking space, told her sister I was going through something, told me she didn't want to label anything until emotions settled. Every version kept her options open while making me sound unstable. I stopped correcting the narrative. I didn't have the energy, and I was starting to understand that people believe whatever story feels easiest anyway. What surprised me most was my own reaction. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't second-guessing myself. The constant anxiety I'd lived with for months was gone, replaced by a dull sadness and a strange sense of relief. I missed her, but I didn't miss who I'd become around her. One evening, she asked if I still loved her. I told her yes, but not in a way that allowed me to stay. That answer seemed to confuse her more than anger would have. She wanted a fight, a negotiation, a chance to reassert control. I didn't give her one. That's when I realized the hardest part wasn't leaving the relationship. It was letting go of the version of the future I'd been protecting long after she stopped believing in it. I moved out on a Thursday. No dramatic packing, no last-minute speeches. Just boxes, a borrowed car, and the quiet understanding that this wasn't temporary. She watched from the doorway, arms crossed, asking practical questions. Who was taking which furniture, how we'd handle rent, whether this meant we were officially done. Not once did she ask how I was holding up. That was a twist that finally landed. Even at the end, her focus was logistics and optics, not loss. When I loaded the last box, she said, "I hope you don't regret this." It wasn't said with malice. It was said like a prediction she expected to come true. I realized in how much she believed I'd come back once the discomfort set in, once I missed her enough to accept whatever terms she offered. The first night alone was harder than I expected. The silence wasn't peaceful yet. It was loud with memories. Every corner reminded me of plans we'd made, versions of the future that now felt fictional. I cried, not because I want to go back, but because leaving still hurts, even when it's right. But underneath the grief was something steady. I could breathe. I wasn't waiting for my phone to buzz or rehearsing conversations in my head. The constant self-doubt was gone. Walking away didn't feel like winning. It felt like choosing not to lose myself any further. The guilt didn't hit right away. That was a twist. At first, I was running on momentum. New routines, new space. The fragile relief of not constantly monitoring someone else's mood. Then, about a week in, it crept up quietly. I'd wake up and think about her making coffee alone. About inside jokes that now had nowhere to land. About the version of me that had planned a future so confidently. My brain started asking dangerous questions. Was I too harsh? Did I give up too quickly? Could this have been fixed if I'd tried harder? That's how guilt works. It doesn't argue facts. It rewrites effort. She helped it along, without even trying. A few texts came through, carefully worded. "I hope you're okay. I've been doing a lot of reflecting. I miss what we had. Nothing about accountability. Nothing about him. Just nostalgia, like a highlight reel designed to pull me backward. The moment that grounded me came unexpectedly. I was telling a friend the full story, out loud, start to finish. As I spoke, I heard myself minimize things the way I always had. Then my friend stopped me and said, "You sound like someone explaining why they stayed, not why they left." That sentence snapped something into place. I realized the guilt wasn't a signal that I'd made the wrong choice. It was residue from months of being trained to prioritize her comfort over my truth. And once I saw it for what it was, it started to lose its grip. One of the strangest things after leaving was how often I second-guessed myself. Not about the cheating. I knew that happened, but about everything else. The tone of conversations, the timing, whether certain moments were really as cold or dismissive as I remembered. It felt like my brain was still living in the old environment, where doubt was safer than certainty. The turning point came when I reread old messages. Not hers, mine. Texts where I apologized for things I couldn't clearly explain. Messages where I asked if we were okay and reassured her before she even replied. Seeing them in sequence was unsettling. It showed a pattern I couldn't argue with anymore. Here's the twist. The more distance I had, the clearer my memory became. Events I'd once labeled as miscommunications now stood out as consistent deflections. Moments I brushed off as bad timing now looked like deliberate avoidance. Nothing new happened. I just finally saw it without her voice narrating over it. I realized how much energy I'd spent trying to be reasonable, to be fair, to be the secure partner who didn't overreact. In doing that, I'd slowly given up my right to trust my own reactions at all. That realization was painful, but it was also grounding, because once I trusted my memory again, the story stopped changing. It settled into something solid and sad and true. And for the first time since it started, I didn't feel confused. I felt aligned with myself, with reality, and with a decision I'd already made. I used to think the hardest part of leaving would be the loneliness, the empty apartment, the quiet nights. That wasn't it. The hardest part was accepting that love by itself doesn't make a relationship safe. You can care deeply about someone and still be slowly erased by the way they treat you. What I took with me wasn't closure. She never really gave that, and I stopped waiting for it. What I took was something more practical. Trust in my own signals. If something feels off long enough that you start doubting yourself, that's not insecurity. That's information. I learned that calm conversations can still be manipulative, that softness can hide avoidance, and that being reasonable shouldn't require constant self-betrayal. What I left behind was the version of myself who kept shrinking to keep the peace, the one who explained away pain so no one else would feel uncomfortable, the one who believed that patience could eventually turn someone into a partner who chose him fully. I don't hate her. I don't wish her harm. But I no longer carry responsibility for understanding her choices or fixing the damage they caused. That was never my job. If you're reading this and seeing yourself in it, here's what I want you to know. Clarity doesn't always arrive with a dramatic moment. Sometimes it comes quietly, when you finally stop arguing with your own memory. And when it does, listen.